Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming to today's bonus talk. My name is Kyle, and I'm the internal user experience researcher at the UXR Collective. And I'm really happy to introduce our speaker for today. We have Sean McKay, founder and CEO of Handrail, here to give us some insights on enterprise research management, how to succeed with scaling your research past just building a repository. I'll hand it over to you, Sean.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming. What a great conference so far, right? We're continuing it. We're going to keep it going a little bit longer. So what I want to talk a little bit about today is going to be about research and insights management, how to scale, and how to build a research or scale a research practice. So at Handrail, we're focused on helping organizations succeed with research at scale. That's how we frame it. And today, as I share some challenges you might face, we'll also talk about some advice, a framework about formalizing and scaling the research practice, and digging into some of those topics, a lot of stuff that we've already heard in the conference, kind of pulling it all together in a different way too. So let's get going. So first off, we all know researchers have superpowers, right? Because we're able to identify true needs, the user goals, the rationale, the reasoning. It's kind of like the little dude super glasses, right? You can get to the why. And companies are beginning to understand the power of getting to the why. And they want more of it, right? So they want us to scale. So our success is the pull here. So how do we do that? We can try and say, let there be scale, but that's not working, right? We all know that's not working. It's far from it because it's not easy. This is organizational change that we're facing, right? It's one of the hardest endeavors you can take on. So it takes time, it takes patience, it takes persistence. It's a journey, right? It has its challenges, and we'll talk about some of those. And so now, as we all know, if a superhero exists, we also know there must be enemies, arch enemies. There must be some sort of kryptonite. So what is that? It's vapor research. So unfortunately, this is a phenomenon that's going on. It's happening everywhere. But what is exactly vapor research? Well, it's a term I made up a couple of years ago, actually. I've been given a couple talks on this. So here's the definitions. Again, these are my definitions. But it's research that vanishes. That's a literal interpretation. You might get a one-time use of the study, but its full ROI cannot be captured by the business. It's a one and done. Or the second one being the research that lacks credibility and value. Might not have context or evidence, not sure how to apply it, can we trust it? All of those things. So let's talk about the top 5 causes for vapor research. So this is my top 5 list. So this list comes though from talking over the years, my own experiences, but also talking to organizations that are all facing how do we scale. Here's some of the top ones we hear. The research is scattered or lost. It's everywhere and nowhere. It could be that, hey, yeah, we have research on that. Phil did that research. Oh, but Phil's not here anymore. He never was good at putting stuff on the server, and now the IT wiped his laptop. So it's gone. Or the next one, lack of evidence or context that I mentioned. So we're skeptical people as researchers, right? So if we don't know who did this, when was it done, how can we trust it? All of those things, even though we found research, we don't trust it, so we're probably going to duplicate it anyway. It's a problem. Ineffective sharing and socializing. This came up in a couple of talks. When we think about that, we'll dive into it, but sharing is critical in how we do that. And if it doesn't work, it vaporizes. Misalignment or bad timing, not ready for it. I'll find it. I know we did research. I'll get back to you. You might lose that momentum, that confidence in what we've done. It's critical. And the last one is a bias in organizations. And the bias usually being, we already know it. We talk to people. We make decisions more on numbers. Yeah, you talk to people. That's your opinion, we have our opinion because we talk to people, all of those types of things. So what are some of the fundamentals of how we can avoid vapor research? I'll walk through 3. The first one is we got to build trust. That's what everybody talks about. We got to build trust in the organization. Well, I think we need to focus on what I'd call develop org empathy. Now, this has been talked about a bit. The way we frame it is org empathy. I'm going to use a metaphor here. And I apologize. This is a metaphor that was created before the pandemic. So we're going to need to look beyond a cruise ship. But let's just think of it as a big ship, needs to be turned. It's hard to be turned. All right. So if the ship is the org, and you'll notice there's another little boat down here. So depending on your maturity level, you may be that boat. You may have a big ship, a big org, and you're not really integrated. You're out there trying to get their attention, make sure they know there's rocks ahead and they got to get turning. But usually it's not that effective. Now, another one would be maybe a little further in the maturity level is you're on the ship. You're part of it. You're part of the processes. You're influencing. You're doing all of that. But you're still along for the ride. Ultimately, where you want to be is here, up helping steer, right? Having the impact that we can make sure that we are avoiding the obstacles that might be hidden until we spend the time to find them. So how do we do that? So first, we need to start looking at all the types of people that we interact with, right? Across the company, including people that are maybe critics or rivals of what you're doing. Across the silos, all the different kinds of roles. And then looking at the types of people that you work with every day, right? It's a whole range that we have to work with. So how do we use what we do as UXers, as researchers, and apply that empathy, developing that org empathy? So the first thing is seeking to understand their goals and motivations, right? Understand the perspectives of the other people involved. So what's driving their behaviors? Take the time to understand, because the goals and incentives that might be driving for them might be that they're getting rewarded in a certain way, right? To meet certain deadlines, or they might have certain constraints that they haven't shared with you yet, but they're very nervous about. So you want to make sure they're and helping, figure out how has it become a shared goal, a shared understanding, right? Because we want to avoid this idea of us and them. We want to be working towards it together. So as part of that, then you're identifying the decision-making styles and adapting. This was spoke about a number of times as well. How do we make sure that we understand, is it data-driven? Is it more emotional? What are the ways that they need to be communicated to? That's part of our job. A key to being successful here is influencing through small success, because a lot of times, especially if research is new or it's a very high stakes thing, how do you get some small success so everyone starts to feel better about what's going on? So we want to start small, show that there's impact, and you can create a track record moving forward. All right, next one. Collaborate. We all know everybody talks about collaborating. What I would say, it's meaningful involvement is more important. So what we've been hearing a lot of, right? Big tent research, everybody should be involved, democratize research. It's a team sport. Molly talked about this on Friday. She's kind of changed some perspective there. And I agree with a lot of what she said. And I think there's a lot of nuance in what she said that we got to make sure that we're thinking about. When I think about where we're at, and I'll get more into this about some of the challenges we're hitting right now, is I'd say that we can't be too precious, but we can't be reckless. We got to respect the craft and figure out how to meet the needs that are being presented to us. The other thing I would say is kind of a mantra is to be practical and purposeful. That was a big part of Molly's talk, was about being intentional, purposeful. What are we choosing to do and what are we choosing not to do? Because the reality is right now, Organizations are seeing the value of research and they want more. So this is awesome, right? This is awesome to the point of awkward awesomeness, right? Because it's put us in a position that we now have to react and figure out how to work in this dynamic. And the two drivers are, there's really not enough trained researchers out there for the demand. And we have other roles and other structures, agile, lean, safe, all these other organizational structures that might be put in play. So how do we deal with that? Well, if we dig into this a little bit, if we have demand and we only have so many researchers, right? So we're not meeting demand. So how are we going to do that? So let's break it down. Not all research is equal. So let's break it down into there's different kinds of research, from usability to more generative, to more strategic. So we get into things more complexity, triangulation, all those types of things. We have a lot going on in the very tactical. We're starting to get into the problem space, and we have the solution space. So there's all different ways everybody talks about this. But at the end of the day, we have very tactical going up to very strategic, and then more complex. So if we only have a little bit of those resources, where is it landing in this? So is it landing all down in just summative and all you're doing is helping do iterative usability and it's at the end of the process and we're already kind of done and then we're just trying to optimize? Or are we trying to get ahead of it a little bit? Or are we stretched thin across all of it? And so we're having trouble deciding where we can spend our time. How do we prioritize? Or you're maybe evolving. It's very organic. You have a group that's been successful at summative and showing value, and we're starting to get ahead of it a little bit. And then we're also been asked to be at a strategic and generative level. So this is kind of the shark with a moon kind of syndrome. So with that, it starts, every organization is different. That's one of the key messages here. But then how do we start having a framework to look at it for this as well? So if we look at how do we prioritize and figure out how to even grow and mature? So Mono talked about that quite a bit, of going from, a UXer of one all the way up to a large organization. It's a different journey through this demand and the needs and the types. Talked about Rennie talked about the 2x2 prioritization that helps to get to what to focus on, what's going to have the highest impact. That's another way of navigating this. It's also about involving others, but again, doing that purposefully, having organized ways to onboard and help train and do it in a way that makes sense for your organization. So that's about scale. So let's get back to meaningful involvement. So how do we do that? So the goal is to have a shared understanding of the research process and the content, because I think that's how we're going to build that respect for the craft. So that's why it needs to be the right level of involvement. It doesn't mean everyone should be doing it. It means what should they be doing and how should they be involved? And if we involve people from the start and understand it, we start to build ownership within those people as well. They start to want to have, it's part of their research too, a stakeholder, an advocate. They want to see it succeed because they're part of it now. The second point is building relationships and alliances. This goes from small to large. Now, we don't want to be doing this manipulatively. We don't want to be doing it to try and game the system. We want to understand why people are making decisions the way they are, what drives them, do it for the right reasons. I found in my career, doing this for 25 plus years, is around finding people that are thinking along the same problems. They're seeing the same things. We're getting a shared vision, and you start building that across the organization. When you do that, you start building momentum. And one of the ways you can do that, quickly accelerate it or create barriers, is the language you use. Now, there's a lot of times talk of like, I don't know why they don't use my research. I've done so much and da-da-da-da-da. Well, the word there was my. It wasn't ours. It wasn't part of the organization. It wasn't shared. It was us and them. So I think we need to really focus on that, as well as try not to be using language that, yes, we want it to be a science. Yes, we want it to be a craft, but it should be approachable. It should be understandable. So they understand what you're talking about. And that is a craft. That is something that's going to take some rigor to do. So the last one then we've talked about is scaling that expertise. If we have expertise, it's everything from people new to research, meaning even new graduates. We need to find ways that they can be onboarded, brought into teams, so we can scale up the team to get the right expertise. And it might also mean bringing designers in, product owners in, other people that may not even know that the impact they could have in participating in a meaningful way in the research. All right, the next one, rigor, transparency, and consistency. This one I call rigor, transparency, and consistency. Yep, it is what it is, right? This is one of the issues that I think research struggles from, is that it's a hidden craft. It's a hidden art. They went away, they talked to a bunch of people, they did a bunch of things, put a bunch of post notes up, they came back and they told us, here's what we need to do. I think we need to find ways to demonstrate that rigor, like quantitative, data-oriented, that rigor, and that it's respected in the mathematical sense. When we're doing qualitative research, I think a lot of times it's not understood the rigor it takes to do it well. How to do good analysis, synthesis, break it down, get it into insights. So we want to have a way to demonstrate that the rigor is there, repeatable. We want to make sure our bullet points come up in the right order, which that one does not. But let's be consistent and make it repeatable, right? So now we have something that we can repeat and people know what to expect. They know what they're buying when they work with us, right? So then we also have the issue of being open and transparent. And this is a key one right now, because that's changed. It used to be, yeah, everybody should see everything and it's no big deal. But we got to do this responsibly now. With PII, governance, compliance, all those types of things, we need to have ways that we do that so that we don't break those rules, those policies. We are able to, though, involve people and they can feel part of the system. All right, so we've talked about vapor research. We've talked about kind of the three key ways to avoid it. And now I want to talk a little bit about a research practice framework. So this is something else I've also been working on for quite a while, and this became a great avenue for us to explore it. So let's talk about what a practice is. So I think it was Rennie that was talking about, having projects versus programs, and I would throw in the practice as the other one. So the practice, even if it's one person, you can start to build a practice. But we start with the core pieces of it, right? We start with people and we start with processes. So at the high level, planning, collecting, analyzing, storing, sharing, all those types of things, no matter if it's a program, a project, tactical, strategic, it's the same high arc. It might be different scale, but it's the same high arc. So we have that in the core. Then around it, what I'm going to talk a little bit about is there's two kind of pillars on each side of drivers that relate to the team and drivers that relate to the business. Now, I'll continue to talk through each of these, team and business, as we go, and I'll talk about the foundation now here. So as we go to build this, we have a foundation that starts with organizing and prioritizing. So we're going to organize, get our roles. Who are we? Who am I if I'm one person? Who are we as a team? How do we define our roles so we can speak with them confidently? And then how do we prioritize what we will and won't work on given the needs of the business? The next thing is it's important to be able to find, share, reuse research, right? The research we're doing needs to be organized. The need is to find it, share it, reuse it. That's a fundamental aspect. The third one is around resources and asset management. So I'm meaning things like participant management, recordings, all the different assets that relate to PowerPoints, all the files that relate to it. How do we bring that into one place, one usable thing that has a way of actually the team understanding it, and we're not trying to figure out rules that go everywhere and where should I put what when. So when we look at the benefit, then if we go back to the team and business, oh, actually skipped ahead there. So process and tools. So a lot of this is done through the process and tools. So what are we doing? How are we working together? But what are the tools and platforms that are important for that? So now if we talk about each of these drivers, on the team side, what this kind of ops, this is really the research ops portion, the blue, where we're really getting things organized. It's what's been really evolving. It's about efficiency for the team. How do we work in an efficient way? And part of that means, how do we have more time to spend on the research itself? If we can be efficient, has two things. It can either help us focus on and have time to do the right work, or it means we could try and do more work, but maybe we're still thin. I'd advocate, obviously, for how do we spend time on the right stuff, doing the research that we're hired to do. From a business perspective, it's about cost effectiveness, right? So the business is going to look at that and say, that's great, you're efficient. The benefit for the business, the value there is the cost effectiveness. So research isn't expensive or perceived to be that way. You're proving that it can be done in a way that can keep up with the business and can be cost effective. So we're starting to have a practice. The next layers we're going to add on to that is, I'm going to use the word collaborate because I mean it from a team perspective, and it's still the same kind of meaning, meaningful involvement across the team itself, from what it should be if you're new to research, new to the team, you're very experienced. How do we collaborate? And this is more important than ever, given forced remote working right now. How do we do this? How do we do it asynchronously? Not everybody can meet at the same time. How do we collaborate as a team? How do we then scale expertise? We've talked about a lot, so I'll keep going there. And then how do we measure impact? How do we make sure the tools are there so we can measure the impact of the work we're doing? So what that's leading us to is, on the team side, those abilities bring that consistency, predictability, where we know how to work as a team. We know how to do the work itself, using those processes and tools. And we're now establishing a level of quality across that expertise, across showing this has had impact because it was meaningful. So on the team side then, what we're starting to prove then is scalability. We have efficiency, we have consistency. It means we can start to do more of this. We can scale it. And on the business side, we start to build credibility. We're cost effective, we have quality research, people are respecting what we're doing, we're building credibility within the organization. Because we're meeting business needs, which are different than our team needs. So let's keep going. What else do we got to do? So if we have all of that as a practice, we're going to need to feed that practice. So we're going to have onboarding and training, which means how do we bring in more expertise? How do we grow it? How do we train it? As well as sustainability. How do we recruit people for the team? How do we continue to have the level of service that's expected and that we've promised? You know, we're building this to how we can serve and help the business achieve its goals. So now on the top level then, and something that you're probably wondering if we're going to get into, which is what's then your enterprise integration strategy? So if this is your practice, you have people, you have resources, and this is all going to be different depending on your maturity level of where you're at with your organization. It might be a small version of this. It might be a very complex version, but these are some of the fundamentals. In enterprise integration strategies, things like, are we going to be a service, more of a service model? Are we going to be more of an embedded model? Are we going to be more of a hybrid? You know, strategic is more at the service level and tactical is embedded. Mono talked about this in her talk in many ways of that journey because she went through a growth that changed that over time. So if we go back to these two columns under these drivers on the team side, that means now if we know that strategy, that integration strategy, and again, it might change over time and we'll have to monitor it. It's evolving. All this should be evolving. You're going to be able to define budgets. What do we need to do this? What resources do we need? And we also start to then have a model that shows the value so we can measure it and the business can see it. So looks like we have everything in the practice, but there's one more thing that's missing. I'm wondering if anybody can guess what it is that we haven't talked about yet. And it is policies, governance, and compliance, everything everybody loves. But it's huge. You can do all this, build a practice, get into a lawsuit, and your credibility and your value and everything else starts to go down. So it's important for being good stewards of participant information, privacy. It's good stewards of being a good part of the organization. So everything from policies around file storage and where things are stored, and not creating challenges, but taking the time to understand, because it's a true business need to meet these. So we've covered a lot here with building this framework, going through it all. And so I'll close with this. So going back to superheroes. So with great power comes great responsibility. And yes, Spider-Man taught us that, right? And I think it's important for us, though, to think about this right now, because from the success we've had in getting research to be seen, and there's a demand that's growing, and we're being asked to scale, it's an important time. It's an opportunity. Design went through it. We're going through it. And we got to make the most of it. So we do need to respect the craft, but not be too precious, but not be too reckless, and make sure we're doing it with purpose, but we are practical, that we can get things done. Because we have people's attention right now. And if we don't focus on it, or if we start to push back a little too hard too early, and depending on the maturity level, or there's an org change. I mean, those happen. I think we all know there's an org restructure. Suddenly everything you're working towards kind of gets upset. You got to be aware of that, because if you push back too soon, you're going to slip back. And especially if we start being demandative and like, why don't we deserve this? We can't be that. We can't be whiny. We can't demand it. We have to prove it. We have to show it and know what we're doing. So we have to be organized. And with that comes that responsibility to deliver and show that we can be part of the overall business impact. And that's where we need to be focusing. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. I know I covered a lot, but I'm looking forward to, if I can find the question panel, to see what kind of questions we have. All right. So I'm looking at a few of these here. So one is, what are ways to involve the client in research? Seeing is believing and very powerful. Yeah, so I think when I talk about meaningful involvement, I look at it and say, what's that person's experience? How would they benefit? So if it's, workshops have always been a good way of getting people involved. But setting like, what's their role in that? It doesn't mean like, hey, you're now an instant researcher. We actually, like when we do synthesis, you're going to want to have different perspectives, and having domain experts in there, hugely important. And so, but you got to define it for them, the do's and the don'ts. If they're going to sit in and take notes or listen, you got to also have ground rules. We literally would give sheets of the ground rules to people. Sometimes they didn't listen to them. They interrupted the research. And then we had to talk to them about how that just ruined the whole session and we can't really use it. So I think it's everything from taking notes as a team, doing collaborative workshops, reviewing research with them as you go, helping show what's happening. All of those things can be good ways of doing that. Let's see. There's some questions around, what do you think about generative research? Do we need to use mixed methods in our work or focus on one or two particular methods? There are a lot of talks about it on the conference. So it depends, right? I think with generative research, we're looking at understanding what we don't know. and what we think we know kind of goes through that scale, right? We think we know this. We know this because we've proven it. What do we also not know? What do we know we not know? We want to go and look at all those, and that's what starts to drive that. And so it's really whatever the questions are. What's the area? Is that something we can do through, like Indy Young talks about listening sessions and getting into really the thinking and rationale behind the reasoning and rationale behind it and the thinking styles. That's one type. And it has a very specific methodology. You have others that is mixed methods. So unfortunately, I don't know that if I have a great answer, but I think it's really looking, as always, to what's the purpose of the question being asked, or what are you trying to learn? Let's see. So we have, what tools have you tried to make user insights accessible company-wide? What are your learnings into getting the insights generators to get the insights into the tool? So yeah, I mean, this is what we focus on every day with Handrail. We're building an end-to-end research management platform. So we're taking on everything from participant management to taking notes as a team, to doing collaborative analysis, getting into storing the insights, and having that have value. Doing the research gives value to the researcher, gives efficiency, while actually building that repository. So we don't have one more thing at the end to do. The repository is built. And it's actually a very rich repository of data. So sorry, I didn't mean to make it a plug, but I mean, that is the problems that we're solving. Let's see. How would you recommend working with organizations to facilitate more direct contact with clients by user researchers versus product sales teams feeding researchers client feedback? Yes. So I think it goes back to a shared understanding of how research works. So it's finding an advocate in that group, wherever you're getting those sources. We worked with an enterprise, actually ended up consulting for them for almost a decade on even one product. And with that, we had to work through a dealer system. And so we had a way that we figured out of how do we ask for the right attributes, personas, and types of people that we need to talk to. And so one way we do that is when we get that feedback just coming in, we'd also then say, okay, but here's some questions I still have. How could we find that out? So almost like helping them understand what we're not getting to help us lead to how can we get it? How can they help us get it? Let's see. Hopefully that answered that. Yes. How do you deal with the interdisciplinary teams where some of them may underestimate the value of research? I think it continues on, and some may feel researchers are too slow. Great question. Right into the thick of it. So, I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but a bit of it is making sure that it is taking on this model of collaborative shared vision. So helping them understand kind of what you're wanting to do and why it may take some time. So if it's continually feeling like it's too slow, then it's probably too late. And so then use those as some examples of hey, if we could have maybe heard about that earlier, this is what we could have done. And at the same time, maybe you talk with some other stakeholders who maybe are a little bit further up in the portfolio or the planning that's going on. Because ultimately, I feel that there's kind of this theory around, it's kind of like SAFe, the scaled agile framework, but I've kind of called it the triple track agile. It's really getting back to the fundamentals of hey, if we're going to do generative concept card designs and research, so we can drop that down into the more tactical. So we're not starting at the tactical and then trying to figure out what to do. I think there's a model there that can come out that you want to be talking with both the groups, the ones that you're tactically working with, but also who's driving that to get a sense of where they're going and what we might need to do research on. Now, at the end of the day, it's a long, what I spoke about, it's organizational change. And so it's more about helping educate them, having a shared experience, not being, again, demandative or us and them, and frankly, not getting into power struggles, because it's really not. It's about how do we help them? How do we help them see what's going on? And it's part of maturing a craft, in my opinion. I mean, it went through it for years, and we're still going through it on the design side. That technically, that's my background, is graphic design, Bachelor of Fine Arts. So I'm more of a generalist. But research is going through that same at the business level. So it's finding the right cadence, finding the things that you will say yes to so you can get it, be successful, but then talking with the organization about how to make change longer term. Let's see. And we have one about how Handrail can help us. Yep, I think I've kind of covered that, but yeah, I mean, that is what we're doing from, again, everything from a platform that is both workflow and a repository, because I think it's about research management as a whole, not just the end result of a repository once we're done. I think it's more important that how are we getting the work done? And this is something we saw in our work, because we're researchers, designers that have switched from a consultancy to a product company. So we've lived the pain, seen it front row, both from a consultancy side as well as embedded. And so that's where this is all coming from. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts, suggestions on org structure? I've seen several approaches to where UXR sits in the enterprise with various benefits, obstacles. Well, I think that got covered in a couple good talks, and that's one thing I want to do. I got a little busy preparing all of this, but what I want to end up doing is to put together a little article about it as well, and include where I think there's some really good talks from this conference that covered these topics. So I know Mona with Lyft, she talked about it in the design leadership track and her journey about some of the different structures and how to do that. From, you have the more embedded teams. So they're distributed across, like we have some customers that are, have like 15 product lines. They work in triads. So they have a UX lead researcher, they have a tech lead, and they're, why am I blanking? A product owner. And so the three of them they're doing continuous discovery. That's their model. Great, let's do it. And let's get them continuously working. There's been pros and cons. We've done training with them then too, of that's more democratizing, bringing everyone along. The researchers, we're very experienced researchers that are among most of those teams. They then are helping have others involved in a meaningful way during the process. So they're not just looking at end result. They're taking notes, they're hearing it, they're helping contribute a different perspective, and they're going there. So there's benefits there, but you also you can get on islands. And so you have your shared knowledge might be broken up a little bit. So some are more like they might sit on teams, and then you pull it together as more of a practice. And so you have ways that you're a community of practice that's coming together. Some have, you're a service bureau that the intake form, and then we send people out and we assign. That's better management, because sometimes people get stuck in a team that don't use them very much or something like that. But they both have their pros and cons, because it becomes service bureau. Can you meet all the needs? Do you have enough domain knowledge to contribute at the levels you need to? Or is that why it's slow? Like you're always onboarding to figure out the space. So having embedded helps make sure you have the space. Managing workload works better in that centralized. Then I think if you think about the hybrid, which are where a lot end up, there's different kinds of research. We want to make sure we don't keep talking about user research as one thing. It is many, many, many things. And so we got to be, what kind of research, what expertise needs to be where. When you're at the top of the triangle, at that triangulation and cross-discipline and potentially across insight groups, that's a whole different skill. That's where the highly skilled researchers need to be there. When you're down to some of the tactical, that's very learnable. People can understand. You just got to be able to ask good questions, know how to listen. That's things that others can help do and do it well. So hopefully that answered that. Like I said, I'm going to put together an article that pulls together what I'm hearing from these different talks from the UXR conference anywhere, and we'll kind of see what we can share there. Because I think amazing conference. Loved all the speakers that I got to see. I'm going to go back and watch the rest as well. So thank you again. I don't know if there's anything else or if we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say thank you so much for the talk, Sean. Thank you everyone for coming. These talks are available to rewatch afterwards if anyone is interested. And I hope everyone has a nice day. You can just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you much.
Keep coming. Research on. I like it.